as I came on this morning, there was quite a lively discussion, and sorry to interrupt. And as we heard Carol talking about all the relationships being not separate entities in the body, but interconnected, the Qigong practice is a wonderful practice where we can directly contemplate in our body the interdependence of the five skandhas, or the non-separate independence, the emptiness of the five skandhas. Okay, so we are now at the third stanza. Listen, Shariputra, all phenomena bear the mark of emptiness. Their true nature is the nature of no birth, no death, no being, no non-being, no defilement, no purity, no increasing, no decreasing. And this morning, we're particularly looking at no birth and no death. Okay, you can unshare. So when we're talking about no birth and no death, it's again, a more sensitive investigation to the nature of things, which we see in our observation of just reality around us. We see it in terms of science. But if we're looking at this, first we can define it a little more clearly. If we're talking about birth and death, birth is the quality of from nothing there is something. And death is from something there is nothing. So what we're looking at is in this web of interdependence, there is a flow of momentary flickerings that exist in a continuation that we try and stop time and say, here is birth and here is death, as opposed to really observing the continuation due to causes and conditions. There's a famous quote by Einstein: energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be changed from one form to another. So in this understanding of interdependence, we're looking at the change from one form to another that exists in a continuation of experience supported by this web of interconnecting causes and conditions. And the classic example for this, Buddha was always using examples that people understood in their environment. And so the classic example is a rice seedling becoming a rice stalk. And we'll look at that a little later. But one of the quotes from the Buddha that talks about interdependent origination is, when this is, that is. From the arising of this comes the arising of that. When this isn't, that isn't. From the cessation of this comes the cessation of that. So in this interdependence, we're looking at all of the supporting causes and conditions that allows the continuous flow of these flickering arisings to continue the process of impermanence and change. Now, all along in our investigation of the Heart Sutra, we've been using the example of a wave. And if we just refer back to that example, we're looking at the ocean. Here in Maine, we sit and contemplate the ocean, and we see a wave arise, and we say, oh, look at that large wave. And it's as though our mind is stopping impermanence and time when we label something as though it exists separate from that. But the wave, when we look at all the causes and conditions, the wave is made out of lots of different smaller waves. It's supported by the rains, by the moon, by gravity. All of these conditions have to be present for it to arise, and it only arises for a momentary flickering that we say, hey, look at that wave, and then in the next second it is descending and another wave is arising. So everything that we experience is like this. It's just that we are isolating ourselves from impermanence and concretizing things as opposed to observing impermanence and this great interdependence. So the example that Buddha used so often in the no birth and no death is looking at how things grow. And we're going back to, can something arise from nothing? And can something that is arising become nothing? So what we see in the rice seed becoming a rice stalk is there has to be a seed and there has to be causes and conditions for the rice stalk to arise. So it's not coming from nothing. So there's a seed and then a sprout and then leaves, the stamen, the stalk, the bud, and the flower. So there are all of these observable changes when there is a seedling growing. And then the more distant conditions, is there enough sunlight? Is there enough water? Is the soil rich with nutrients? Is there space and time? So for the seed to germinate and grow, all of these causes and conditions have to be present. And then when we're looking at this, it's sort of like a seesaw. So we're looking at, is there birth? And so there's this seed, and is a plant born, or is the plant a evolving, arising participant in interdependence? So first we have the seed, and as the stalk sprout comes out, it's like a seesaw. So the sprout is coming out and the seed is becoming unnecessary, so the seed is falling away. And so then the stalk is arising and it's becoming a plant with a flower. And by the time there's a flowering, the seed is gone. So there's a relationship between the two. When there's a stalk and a flower, the original seed is gone. But does that indicate it's coming out of nothing? We can't say it's coming out of nothing. Although the seed is gone, there is a continuation, in the sense that a rice seed produces a rice plant. It can't produce a wheat plant or a geranium. So although as we're observing, it looks like the seed is gone, as though there's a death of the seed and only the rice is present, but we can't lose sight of the continuation. So this is something that it's good to really take a close look and observe, because this is in our outer world, but then we can relate it to our inner world as well. see if I can find. I'm not as experienced in sharing YouTube videos, but let me see if I can do it. Okay. And this rice seed to rice stalk and rice plant, rice, the edible rice, is something that the great Buddhist philosophers go into great detail about. And so it really is something we want to take in and look at. So here we Okay, so there we go. We see the seed, and we see the seed falling away, and we see the rice stalk coming out, and we see that the rice plant was present in the seed, but when the rice plant is there, the seed is gone. So it didn't come from nothing, but the original cause has disappeared when we get the result. So the result and the cause are not there at the same time. So if we look at that in terms of our own lives, and we say no birth, no death, when we were born, we like to think of it as this miracle happened, and it is a miracle, but it didn't come out of nowhere. It came from the original seed and egg in the parents, which then were supported by all the causes and conditions of those two meeting, and they were a result of the causes and conditions of their parents and the causes and conditions of their parents. So there's this continuation, that we think of as ancestry. So there's a way of saying there's no birth instead of no birth in the sense of something entirely new. There's a continuation of causes and conditions that arises in the birth of a baby. And then if we look at death, there's the sense of, as Thich Nhat Hanh teaches, there's the change of state. So the physical form is buried or is cremated, and there's a change of state so that physical aspect of ourselves becomes a part of the continuation of the planet. So if you've had the privilege to watch a cremation, you see the smoke going up in the air. So there's a change of state of the elements of the body becoming smoke, the smoke going in the clouds, and the clouds coming down in a change of state as rain, creating a cycle. And in terms of the continuation, if we explore life after life, from the perspective of the Tibetans, there's a continuation not of a personality, but of what our consciousness carries in terms of all of the karmic seeds we've planted, which is experienced as a change of state, just like when you go to sleep and you wake up, when you go to sleep and you wake as a dreamer, there's a change of state. It's not the same as waking reality, but there is a consciousness experiencing, the causes and conditions, perhaps of the day that creates dream. Similarly, at the moment of death, there is this moment of pure awareness where we can see the nature of our mind. And if not, we're propelled into the bardo. So just like experience a dream, the bardo is another kind of experience that's disembodied, that as it's experienced determines what your next life is. So the teaching of no birth and no death is a really interesting teaching because it's inviting us to see how all the complexity of causes and conditions creates the experience that we're having right in this moment. And it is also what determines our next life. And so the practical application is, what are we doing to create the causes and conditions that will allow us to experience both individually and in the world we're experiencing, the world we want to create. So, if we look at that in terms of the really chaotic times that we're experiencing right now, okay, there are these causes and conditions that are arising in our present experience that, let's say, are less than loving, less than compassionate. So if we want to create a better world for ourselves and all beings, it might be a time for really conscious generosity. If we look at the kind of scarcity, instead of responding with fear, which creates seeds of fear in our consciousness, like hoarding would create a karma of scarcity, giving away things right now would be an active antidote. We see the aggression that's in the world, and so we can really cultivate non-aggression, non-violence in our words, in our thoughts, in our actions. And that's why it's so important that we respond not in kind, not in reaction to these times, but see, all right, this is not the world I want to create, so I will become even more mindful that my actions are compassionate and loving and generous, even, as we say in our opening prayers, to those beings that obstruct us or who are harmful and violent. So it's cultivating the qualities that will give rise to the next moment, not only to our next life, and really focusing on how we respond, the manner in which we respond, not just mindless response or reactive response. So Thich Nhat Hanh really emphasizes the change of state. And another thing that is so helpful is understanding we could say understanding lineage. We could say understanding our own ancestry. We could say addressing the difference between mourning and grief. Really taking in that those beings we love and are devoted to are present in a different way after they die. And not feeling bereft or despairing. And he gave teachings on this quite a lot in the era before his death, so that his students understood that there was a physicality to the presence in the sense that the cloud produces rain, but also in our understanding of lineage, there's a blessings presence. So when we do the dedication prayers, thinking about Tilopa, Naropa, Marpa, Milarepa, when we think of the heritage of, I think our current Drikung Chetsang Rinpoche is the 37th in the reincarnation lineages of the Rinpoches. If we think of Achi, the great-great-grandmother of the first Lord Jigten Sumgun, the founder of the lineage, there's an active blessing presence of all of the aspirations that they made and everything they did to create the causes and conditions that then allow for the current teachings that we're receiving. I was contemplating this this week. I was sitting in meditation and thinking of His Holiness. We're celebrating His Holiness next Sunday. And he's leaving active life for a while, going into 3-year retreat. And thinking about the difference between despair and understanding interdependence. So their whole culture and society was desecrated, just almost obliterated in a meaningful way. And the great Rinpoches, as refugees, came into India and experienced totally different situations. So the causes and conditions that created the world they knew, Lhasa and Tibet and the very isolated monastic system, all of a sudden came into a different world that had, World Wide Web, access to every country, every continent, and the cries of suffering coming from every continent, every planet, every continent and every culture. And their response to that was, well, how do we create the causes and conditions? One person can't go out and teach every single person on the planet, But if we recreate an education system and a retreat system, then we're building a generation of people who can offer the Dharma, the teachings on kindness and bodhicitta, which are the balm or the medicine for the suffering. So there's a sense of understanding causes and conditions as a antidote to despair, that in every moment we can create the causes and conditions for the next moment and for our continuing karma. So this is at once simple and complex. So as I said, Nagarjuna analyzed the rice and the rice stalk and the change in the rice and the rice stalk, which became part of Madhyamaka philosophy, which goes into great detail about cause and result and the depth of logical understanding and how that applies. But in our lives, we can really address it this morning at looking at causes and conditions producing this moment and how to set in motion causes and conditions for the world we'd like to see in the future. So I'd like to give us maybe 5 minutes of individual contemplation, thinking about essentially thinking about hope and joy arising, but how do you look at in your life the causes and conditions that produced your health and well-being and sources of joy, and how can you bring these forward consciously as opposed to getting lost in hopelessness or confusion or despair. What would be the ways to keep these in mind for you? Let's just find one aspect you'd like to keep in mind and practice this week that becomes the seed of something growing in your life and in your community. Okay, let's sit with that for a few minutes. So changing the world by creating the conditions that produce the world we experience. Similarly, being very aware through mindfulness of healing ourselves in many different ways so that we create the conditions for the next life, to meet the Dharma, to meet a teacher, to have the resources to flourish in realization.